Resourceful Designer, episode 21, Ending Relationships with Your Graphic Design Clients.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. His favorite snack while working is a bowl of grapes. Mark DeCote.
Welcome. I'd like to thank you for joining little old me and discussing ways to improve your graphic design business. Now, before I go any further, I want to remind you that if you have any comments on this episode, or if you want access to any of the links or anything I discuss in this episode, you can find the show notes at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 21. Now, I received another great 5-star review in iTunes this week. And this one came in from Xeria9 in the US. And the review reads, "So helpful, a great free resource for any designer, especially those who are self-employed. I really enjoy Mark's speaking style, which is to the point with positivity and optimism, while also being extremely helpful." Well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate the kind words. It means a lot. And I want to thank those of you who have left just a star review and didn't bother writing anything. That's fine as well. I think in the US alone, I'm up to 5-star reviews, which is great. The more positive reviews I get, the higher this podcast will appear in the rankings, which means more people can discover it. So if you can take a minute out of your busy day and head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes and leave me a review there, I would be forever grateful. And now on to my resource of the week. Now, this week's resource is a little utility called Type Expander. And I can't tell you how much time this little utility has saved me over the years. If I was to add it up, I'm sure it would be hundreds of dollars worth of time. And if you're not already using Text Expander, I really suggest you do. I was a little apprehensive at first when I first discovered it and said, well, what am I really going to use that for? But once I got my hands on it, I started plugging all sorts of little snippets in there. And what Type Expander does, if you're not familiar with it, it allows you to create little shortcuts. And when typed, a predetermined block of text will replace what you just typed. For example, anytime I go on the web or anywhere and I have to type out the email address feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com, instead of typing that whole thing out, I just type FRDC, which is the shortcut I chose. And as soon as I type FRDC, those 4 letters are automatically replaced with my full email address. I do the same thing with the URL with the shortcut RD021, which automatically puts the URL into wherever it's typed. So you can see how this would really save time. Now, I know when I was coding websites, I'm doing most of my websites in WordPress these days, but I still have a whole bunch of snippets for when I'm coding websites, such as when I open up a blank document, all I have to do is type in HTMP, which is my shortcut for an HTML page, and all the code for a standard HTML page will automatically be written out with all the headers, the body tags, and everything, and then I just start filling it. Same way as if I'm coding something and I have to insert an image, all I have to type is .img, and the entire code for an image will appear there. And all I have to do is go in and update the little pieces to say what image. Same thing anytime I wanted to code a table. It was just .tbl, and the code for a pre-formatted table would appear, and I just have to go in and change how many rows and columns and adjust it to the way I want, but I didn't have to type out all the code. So just that alone, building websites, Text Expander has saved me so much time. But even now, there's so many other things that I'm using it for. Now, at the time I'm recording this, you can get Text Expander at half price for $22 via Mighty Deals. And at that price, it's a steal. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/textexpander and pick up your copy today. Now, in last week's podcast episode, I talked about the importance of building relationships with your graphic design clients and how those relationships can really benefit your business. I touched on various things you can do in order to build those relationships and get to know your clients on a more personal level outside of just the project you're working on with them. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode, I suggest you do, and you can find it at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 20. But no matter how hard we try to build relationships with our clients, there does come some times when things just don't line up and you have to end a relationship. Now, that could be ending a relationship before it even begins, or ending a long-standing relationship. Now, when it comes to long-standing relationships, you should do everything in your power to try to save them, because you've spent a lot of time and effort building it, and you don't want to see all that go to waste. But there does come times when it's a must. Now, I'm going to divide this discussion into 2 sections, The first being ending a relationship before it begins, and the second part will be ending an existing relationship. So what are some reasons you'd want to end a client relationship before it even gets off the ground? Maybe you get contacted by a new client and there's just something about the whole situation that doesn't sit right with you. Maybe you're getting some bad vibes from them. Maybe you sit down and talk with them and realize that there's a real big clash of personalities. Or maybe it's just something as simple as they don't have the budget to hire you. You got to remember that this is your business. The last thing you want to do is start a relationship with somebody you can't get along with. So from the get-go is the perfect time to step away and wipe your hands of the whole deal. Now, I understand that if you're just starting out or if you're strapped for cash, this may be difficult, and maybe you have to plow through and put up with it. But hopefully you'll come to a time in your business where you can be a little bit pickier about who you work for. Now, in the cases where you do really need the work and you have a client that you just don't feel comfortable with, my suggestion is take the job, but ask for the money up front. Not just a deposit, ask for all the money up front and start working on the project only once you get that money. Sometimes the client will say, sure, I can pay you up front, but go ahead and get started while I put this through the accounting department or whatever. Or maybe a new startup will say, well, I haven't received my checks yet. So as soon as I receive the checks, I'll cut one for you. Well, if you get some sort of bad vibe from the client, just hold fast and tell them that your policy is not to start anything until you get paid. And then once you get paid, go for it. And who knows, if you're lucky, the bad vibes or clash of personality or whatever the case may be that didn't sit right at the beginning may turn out to be untrue, and this may turn out to be a great client. But again, that's a chance you only have to take if you're really desperate. Otherwise, thank the client for thinking of you and pass on the job. But when doing so, show some respect. Don't burn any bridges. Try not to upset the potential client because you never know what'll happen down the road. Maybe the bad vibes you're feeling now is because the person you're talking with is new, they're just starting out. Maybe they're under a lot of stress and you pass on a job now, but maybe a couple years down the road, once they're established and they realize how business works and how to deal with people, they might decide they need your services again. But if you gave them a hard time during the first meeting, they might not want to reach out to you. I've had clients that I've turned down come back years later and I ended up doing work for them. So never burn those bridges. So how do you turn down a new client? That could be a really scary position for a lot of people, but it's actually the best time to do it. You don't want to get the project going and then realize that the things aren't going to work out and then try to end it. That could be much worse. If you get the bad vibes up front, or if your personalities don't mesh, or for whatever reason, maybe the client is hemming and hawing over your price and asking for a discount or telling you maybe you can do it this way, or they want you to work in a certain fashion and you're not okay with that. Maybe they want to come sit beside you while you're designing and they insist and you refuse. Well, that could be a very good reason to just say, no, this isn't going to work out. But whenever the time comes, just be frank with them and tell them that you don't think this is a project for you or you don't think this is a job that you can take on, and then suggest that they find somebody else. It's as simple as that. If you want to go so far as to recommend some other designers, I'll do that sometimes. I know there are a few lesser inexperienced designers in the area here that I know of. And sometimes when somebody will approach me and it's just not a job I want to do, or it's something that they don't need my expertise for, I'll often give them a few names of a couple of other designers that might be willing to take on the job. So let the client know that either the job's not for you, you can't lower your price, you can't work the way that they want you to, and just thank them very much for considering you in the first place, and then end it there. So as I said, ending a relationship before it even begins is probably the easiest thing to do. But sometimes you don't get those cues to tell you that this isn't a good fit, and you do take on the client, and later on, maybe you do have to let them go. But before I get into ending an existing relationship, I just want to say that ending a relationship with a client before it begins, or maybe I should say not starting a relationship with a client, is not exactly the same thing as turning down work. There are many reasons you may want to turn down work, but you still would want to have a relationship with the client. Maybe somebody comes to you and you think this would be a great fit. I love their company. I love what they want to do, but they don't have the budget to hire you. Now, you should never compromise your prices. You should never give a discount for anything like that, unless you were talking a nonprofit and you want to help them out, do some pro bono work and that sort of thing. But when it comes to just a normal client, you should stick to your business practices. If you have a certain fee that you charge, that's the price. If they can't pay it, so be it. But let them know that you would love to work with them, but unfortunately, these are your prices. Now, I've had conversations with clients before like this that told me they couldn't afford me and asked, is there any way I can cut stuff out of the project to bring the price down? And I told them that no, this is the price, this is how it's going to go. And I would kindly tell them that I would love to do the work, but if you don't have the money to pay me, there's no sense me taking on the job. And on a few occasions, the clients actually found the money. Now, once again, in any situation like that, I always ask for full payment up front as opposed to my normal 50% down. But if you present yourself really well and then you turn down the work really gracefully, you'd be surprised sometimes how much respect they gain for you to the point where they really want to work with you and they'll find a way. They'll find the money that they need if they don't have the budget. Now, sometimes there's other reasons for turning down work. Maybe you're too busy. And that happens to me from time to time. Somebody will come up to me and say, Mark, I need a website built. And I'll say, great, I'd love to do your website. But I have a policy that I never work on more than 3 websites at a time. And usually that means one of them out being proofed by a client before going live and the other 2 under development. So if somebody comes to me for a website and I have 3 website projects on the go, I will tell them that I'll gladly take on your project, but because of the scope of the ones I'm working on now, I won't be able to start your website for maybe 3-4 weeks or 2 months or whatever, depending on the current sites I'm working on. So in that way, I'm turning down work. I'm telling them that I would love to do it. I'm just too busy right now to do it, so I can't handle it. But I give them an option. Sometimes I will recommend another designer that they can go to for it. Or I'll tell them that if you're willing to wait, as soon as I'm done one of these projects, I can take yours on. And it's kind of funny, but just the fact of telling a client that you're too busy to take on their work, it gives them the impression that if you're that busy, you must be really, really good. And if you're really, really that good, they really, really want to work with you. And I'm always surprised when a client will come up to me and says, Mark, I need a website. I need it fast. And I tell them, I would love to help you, but I wouldn't be able to even start it for another 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, this website that they need is so fast becomes something that they don't mind waiting 6 weeks for me to even start working on it because they've decided they want to work with me. So I can tell you that over the last 10 years that I've been in business for myself, very rarely have I actually lost a client by telling them I'm too busy to start something right now. Most of them, no matter how much of a rush they're in, if they do want to work with you, will be willing to work on your schedule. Now, there are other times where you may turn down work for other reasons. Maybe you're going on holidays, you're taking 2 weeks off, you're going on a much needed vacation, and a client comes up to you and says they need something by a certain date. Well, you're not going to be around. There's nothing you can do about that. So it's okay to turn down work just because you're not physically going to be able to work on it. Now, you can tell them that you can work on it when you get back from your vacation. But if they have some sort of deadline, they might have to go to somebody else. But whether you're turning down work because you're too busy, they don't have the budget, you're going on vacation, or whatever the reason, these are not the same as ending a relationship. Any one of those clients that you turn down work from, you can still have a really good relationship with. In fact, being honest with them that you can't work on their stuff right now can help build that relationship. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that turning down work is not the same thing as ending or not starting a relationship with a client. Now, the more difficult part is ending a relationship with an existing client. And sometimes this is something that's built up over the years. The clients that you start resenting every time you get an email or a phone call. You see their number pop up on call display and you dread picking up the receiver. Well, sometimes it comes to a point where it's best for both of you to end the relationship. Now, maybe the reason you dread these clients is the way they communicate with you, their lack of payment. Maybe they're really late at paying their bills. They're too demanding. The type of client that if you tell them you're going to send them a proof tomorrow, they start emailing you at 8 a.m. asking where the proof is. You got to remember, as I said at the beginning, this is your business. You get to choose who you're going to work with and how you're going to work. It's one thing when you're working for an employer or you're working at an agency and you don't have a say in who you work with, and maybe you might be stuck with somebody that's unfavorable. But when you're working for yourself and you're running your own business, you are in charge and you get to decide. Now, I'm actually in the process right now of ending a relationship with a client. Now, this is somebody that I built the website for about 4 years ago. I was actually referred to him by a mutual friend of ours. He wanted to start an online e-store selling certain products. So he reached out to me, we discussed the job, we decided on the platform, purchased the e-commerce framework we'd use and any plugins that were required for payment and shipping and all that stuff. And I built the website for him, and he loved it. He paid his bill on time, and I thought this was a great client to work for. Now, because of the nature of the website, he had access to all the back-end stuff, so he can change stuff and change categories of his products and do adjustments and all sorts of stuff. And by doing that, about 6 months after the site was launched, he broke the website. Now, he was very good about it, and he contacted me and said, is there anything you could do? And I told him this will cost more money. I gave him an idea of how much it would cost to fix, and he told me to go ahead with it. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't something I can do. I didn't really know what he had done to break it, and I wasn't an expert in that e-commerce platform. So I actually hired somebody who was an expert in that platform to come in and fix it. And they did manage. They fixed it. They did a good job. And when the site was up and running, I invoiced the client. Now, this time, he didn't pay me so quick, and I had to send him a few reminders over the next couple of months before I finally did receive payment. And I started noticing that pattern building. Every time I'd do something for him and I'd send him an invoice, it was a little bit longer before I'd get payment. And these weren't huge invoices. Like, I'm only talking a couple of $100s here. But it would take him some time. And I'd get emails from him saying, yep, okay, I'll send payment tomorrow, or I'm putting the check in the mail this afternoon. And of course, it never came. So then in December of 2014, I sent him an invoice for his website renewal because I host the website for him and I handle the domain names and all that. I sent him an invoice for the website renewal, the multiple domains, as well as for some of the work I had done for him in the last couple of months. So I sent him an invoice, and the invoice was only about $600 and some. And then it started again. He didn't pay. I kept sending him a statement every month to remind him of his balance. And I admit that the emails I was sending him every month, which started off very polite and respectful, started getting more and more demanding as the months went by. So finally, after 5 or 6 months, he sent me an email and told me that he was in a financial crisis. And he asked me, he says, do you mind if I wait another month before paying you? Well, this was the first I had actually heard back from him. So being the nice guy that I am, I agreed. So I told him I would give him another 30 days, at which point I would require payment. And he agreed. Now, of course, 30 days came and went, and still nothing from him. So I sent him an email, and I told him, that's it. I need payment. And I threatened taking him to small claims court, which, of course, I had no intention of doing for just $600. It wasn't worth my time. It was too small an amount to really go to small claims court, but I still threatened him with that. So then what he came back with is, would I be willing to accept installments on a monthly basis? Which at this point, I gladly accepted. So he sent me a $150 payment, which was a little less than 1/4 of the total invoice. Now, I had to stay on top of him because, of course, a month later, I still hadn't received the second payment. And I had to remind him on several occasions that we had made an agreement. And over the next few months, he did send me some small installments. Well, finally come December, exactly a year after I had sent the invoice, he still had about $160 to pay. And I told him, I said, listen, it's been a year. I want this settled before the end of 2015 so I can take it off my books and not carry it into the new year. Well, we're now the beginning of February, and I still haven't heard or received my final payment. So at this point, I'm considering this relationship with this client over. And as it happens, his domain names come up for renewal at the beginning of March. So I sent him an email and told him that I can no longer deal with him as a client because of his lack of payment. And if he wants to continue his website, he needs to either take it over himself or find somebody else to do it. And that when his domain names come up for renewal at the beginning of March, I will not be renewing them. Now, at this point, I'm not asking for the rest of the money. If he pays me, great. If not, I'll just write off the $150 so that he still owes me and be done with it. But this is a client that I had a really good working relationship to begin with for the first, I'd say, 2 years. And then things started going down. And I know that it's not him personally. I know he had financial difficulties, but I am running a business here. And it was the lack of communication from him that caused it to get to this point. And even if he came into money and he paid me off and he decided that he would pay all his bills in advance at this point, I no longer want to do any work for him. So this is a case of bad payment leading to me having to end a relationship with a good client. Now, I had mentioned another scenario way back in episode 5 entitled Don't Compromise Your Principles for Your Design Business. And in it, I talked about a company that I had done work for many years. At the time was probably my biggest client and how I had to end the relationship with them. Now, if you don't remember that story, I'll just go over it quickly. This was a client that was actually an umbrella company of several other small businesses, and I was designing for all of them. They were a local cellular carrier, they owned gas stations, they owned restaurants, they owned some retail stores, and they were a tobacco manufacturer, amongst a few other things as well. Now, over the years, I had branded each one of their companies. I had done all sorts of work for them. And I think if I added it all up, they were my biggest client. With the most money I'd collected was from them out of all my clients. And we had a great working relationship. But then one day, the owner came to me for his tobacco company, and he wanted me to design a poster for him to try to help sell their brand. And in the instructions he gave me were try to do something that would appeal to teenagers and entice them to start smoking. Now, I was completely against this idea. I'm not a smoker. My wife actually is a nurse. She works at the local health unit, and part of their mandate is educating people on the dangers of smoking. And I could just imagine what would happen if her work discovered that I was creating posters trying to entice teenagers to start smoking. So I told my client that I couldn't do this. Both ethically and morally, I was against it, and I wouldn't design this poster for them. And they gave me an ultimatum. They said, we've been doing business with you for years. We love your work, but if you can't do this, we're going to have to find somebody else. And that was a lot of money that was on the table. And I told them I would not do it. I would not be responsible for anything that would entice teenagers to start smoking. And true to their word, they found another designer that did the poster, and I never saw another job from them again. Now, that one did hurt me financially because, as I said, that was a lot of money coming in from that client. But ethically and morally, I felt good about turning down that work. But I can tell you, from both of these situations, my website client that I ended the relationship and this tobacco client that ended the relationship with me, neither of them were easy. The tobacco client, as I said, hit me big financially. That was a big blow to my monthly income. But in time, everything evened out and I picked up other clients. And looking back now, I don't think I would have done anything different. As for the website client, I wish things could have worked out better. He started off as a great client, but it got to the point that no matter what he says or does, I will never work for him again. The relationship deteriorated to that point where I am more comfortable ending it than trying to save it. And I hope that you never have to make any of these decisions. I really hope that every one of your clients is a great relationship and you can keep them for years and years until they either retire or you retire or whatever the case may be. But unfortunately, we're going to be realistic. There will be times when relationships will have to be severed, and it's never easy. Now, just like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about ending a relationship before it even starts, even in these cases, don't burn your bridges. That tobacco client, I didn't say anything to them, and they didn't say anything nasty to me. It was just a decision that we came to that I couldn't work on what they wanted me to work on, and they couldn't have a designer refuse to do the work they needed. So we parted ways, but we parted ways on good terms. And although I've never worked for them again, I have found out over the years that they have referred me to other people. And on the rare occasion that I do run into the owner or the CEO of this company, we've stopped and chatted and had a great conversation before parting ways again. And if they ever decided to come back to me, I would gladly take them on, as long as they didn't ask me to do something similar again. Now, as I mentioned, the website client, I will never take him on again as a client. But even in the way I ended the relationship, I tried not to burn any bridges because who knows, maybe he'll end up referring me someday. And if that time ever comes, then I'll have to be a judge on whether somebody he refers to me is worth me taking on as a client. And I'll have to see about those personality conflicts or bad vibes or whatever the case may be. But if it ever comes to that, I'll try not to hold this client against the new client. But whenever you do have to end an existing relationship, do make sure you let them down easy. As I said, don't burn any bridges because you never know what will happen down the road. Maybe you're dealing with the CEO of a company and you don't get along with him and you refuse to take his work. But if you do it nicely, maybe he'll eventually move on and the new CEO of that company will reach out to you for work and maybe you'll create a great relationship. But depending on how you handled the first CEO, he might have spread the word about you. And if it was in the negative, the new CEO might never reach out. So it's always a tough decision. And if you can, try to save the relationship. I tried to do the best I could with this web client. After 6 months of not hearing from him, he asked for a payment extension and I gave it to him. I gave him 30 days. And then when I was expecting payment in full, He asked for installments and I agreed to that. And it was only once he stopped paying his installments that I finally had to put my foot down and say no more. So this is probably one of the toughest things you would ever have to do in your business, is telling a client you no longer want to work for them, or just ending the relationship. Or it could be the toughest thing that you have to face in your business. In the case of a client telling you they no longer want to work with you. And it may be very difficult in the moment when it's happening, but life has a way of evening things out. And years later, when you look back at it, you'll realize it wasn't that big an issue as you made it out to be. Now, I would love to hear your stories on ending relationships with your clients, how they went well or how they didn't. So leave me a comment on the show notes page at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 21 and let me know how it went for you. Now, I'd like to introduce a new section to the podcast here, and this is a listener question section. I got a great question here from Jessica, but before I get to her question, I just want to open up to you. If you have any questions about running a graphic design or a web design business, and you'd like to reach out to me or have me cover it on a future episode, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and leave your question there. And if I think it's a good question that would benefit the listeners of Resourceful Designer, I'll include it on a future episode of the podcast. Now, while I'm at it, I might as well give you my other contact information. You can always email me at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com, or you can comment on the Facebook page at facebook.com/resourcefuldesigner, or hit me up on Twitter at resourcefuld. Now, as I mentioned, I have a question here from Jessica, and she says, I currently do in-house print design work for an insurance company. I'm approaching the idea of starting my own business, and I'd like to offer web design. However, I've never done any web design in the past. I'm wondering if you can advise where to start in the learning process. I'm looking at Lynda videos, but I don't even know if I should focus on WordPress, HTML, CSS, or should I work on front-end design of a web page and partner with a web developer to handle the coding and the back-end design? I've never grasped writing code, and I'm not sure if it's necessary to do myself. Well, thanks for the question, Jessica. And this is a really good one. And it kind of mirrors my start. When I was working for the printing company, which I was there for 15 years, I actually started my business doing websites. I couldn't do graphic design. I couldn't do logos. I couldn't do flyers. I couldn't do anything that was involved with print design because that was a conflict of interest with my job at the commercial printers, because that's the stuff I did there. So what I started focusing on was web design. Now, back then, I was using a software that's now long retired. It was software called Adobe Go Live. Some of you old timers might remember that. And it was basically a WYSIWYG software that allowed you to paste things on the page the way you wanted to look, and you really didn't need to know any coding. Now, the problem with Go Live was that the websites it created were not really the best functionally. Other web designers who did know code thought that it did really bad code, and it would often break in different web browsers. So when I started getting more serious about web design, I took it upon myself to learn HTML and CSS, and I did it through Lynda. Back then, they weren't online. I actually ordered DVDs of their courses, and I bought an HTML course and a couple of their CSS courses. And that really helped me out to the point where when Adobe Go Live was finally discontinued, a lot of people were making the jump to Dreamweaver. Well, instead of that, I decided to make the jump to hand coding, and for years, I just code websites myself. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, nowadays I do most of my work in WordPress just because I love the platform and the ease of it, and not just throwing templates out it. I like developing your own stuff from scratch, custom, or using a theme like Elegant Themes Divi theme, which if you're not good at the whole custom thing, Divi by Elegant Themes, which you can get by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/elegant, is a wonderful, wonderful theme for WordPress. And you could really use it. It's all modular where you're moving different pieces around, but it allows you to build a website to your liking. Now, of course, it's not as robust as doing a full custom site. But as I said, if you are just starting out and you don't know a lot about the whole process, using a theme like Divi can really make you look like an expert while you're learning. Now, as for yourself, Jessica, I would say there's a few options that you can take, and it's really up to you to decide what's best. But I personally think that knowing some HTML and some CSS would be a huge asset to you. Even if you don't custom code websites, just knowing how HTML works and how CSS works could sometimes save you a lot of time, especially if you are dealing with developers or if you are working in WordPress and there's something that you have to change every once in a while. Even if you have a theme that you bought, sometimes there'll be something you want to change in the theme. And the only way to do that is to go into the code. And if you go into the code and you have a general understanding of how the code works, it'll make it a lot easier for you to go in and change just those little bits. Even with the help of somebody else and they say, here's the code to put in, it can be really scary to replace code or change a few lines of code if you don't really know what the code is doing. You said you're already watching Lynda videos, and anybody else who's interested in what Lynda has to offer as far as learning HTML, CSS, PHP, MySQL, anything to do with websites, they have some great resources. That's how I learned. I learned everything I know about web design and coding through Lynda. And you can get a 10-day free trial and have a look at what videos they offer by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/Lynda, and that's Lynda with a Y. So yes, Jessica, I would think that knowing HTML and CSS would be a huge asset to you. Although I do know several web designers that don't know how to code at all. I do think it is a benefit. And if you've already started learning, even if you don't think you'll ever do it, it's a good idea to at least finish those courses and get a general understanding. Now, as for starting off, I think WordPress would be your best bet. Out of everything, I think it has the smallest learning curve, especially if you use something like the Divi theme that I mentioned from Elegant Themes, which allows you to use your creativity in designing a website. And it's still a very functional and very solid theme. So it's pretty hard to break it. And the thing with Elegant Themes is they also have a really, really great support forum where other users, as well as developers for Elegant Themes, will answer your questions and help you if you have any problems. And I know I've used them many times when I want to figure out how to do something or adjust something. I just go in there and within a few minutes, if I don't already find somebody that had mentioned or talked about it in the forums, if I can ask a question, usually within half an hour, I have an answer to my question, which is another reason why I love Elegant Themes. And I have used them for more than just the Divi theme. I have to admit the Divi theme is the one I've used the most, especially the recent updates. They've been great, but I have used other themes from them because when you sign up for Elegant Themes, you get access. I think they have 87 themes and you get all of them for one price. And you can pay a yearly price or you pay a one-time. I bought the one-time developer price, so I never have to pay again. It was a little bit more expensive, but I have access to anything they put out for as long as they stick around. Now, you did mention teaming up with a developer, which can be a great way to do things. This way, you just design the face of the website in something like Photoshop and then let the developer work their magic. But again, this is something I would only tackle once you know how websites work. And you would have to know some HTML and some CSS so that when you're designing the front end of what the website will look like, you'll be able to know that your developer can handle or do what you expect this site to look like and not have to change it up too much. So it's a great relationship if you can work with a developer and then just do the front end of the site. But without a general knowledge of how the whole back end of a website works, I think it might be difficult to work with a developer, especially if at some point you have to change developers and you hire somebody new and you don't know how the back end works. It might be hard to bring them up to speed or even explain something that you might need changed. So I hope that kind of answers your question, Jessica. As I said, if you're serious about getting into web design and you're just starting off and you don't know, I do suggest learning at least HTML and CSS. You don't have to tackle PHP and MySQL and Java and all the other languages, but at least HTML and CSS are, I would say, a necessity for anybody wanting to do web design. And you don't have to know how to do them by heart. You just have to be able to understand how it works so that if you look at code, you can kind of read what it's doing and understand it. And then just start working with WordPress. And I would definitely tell you a self-hosted WordPress site, not something on WordPress.com. It's two different things. And if you're going to be designing websites, you're going to be doing self-hosted websites. So install WordPress on some test site somewhere. I have a domain name that I use for testing things, and that's all I use it for. I'm constantly wiping it clean and installing a fresh version of WordPress just to try different things on it. Some people like to do that locally, but I actually have a domain where I do that. WordPress, as I mentioned, has the smallest learning curve of the other methods, so yes, give that one a try. So I wish you the best of luck with this, Jessica, in learning web design, and I hope one day your transition to working from home pays out because the freedom it creates is wonderful. As I've said many times, I've been doing this for over 10 years now. and I don't think I would ever go back to working for somebody else. Actually, you know what? I mentioned that I've been doing this for over 10 years. Well, that's a fib. I just looked at the calendar, and February 6th will be my 10th anniversary of being in business. So at the time I'm recording this, it's just under 10 years I've been in business. I hadn't even realized that. Wow, happy anniversary to me. So anyways, if you have any questions that you would like answered on a future episode of the podcast, you can either email me at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com or fill out my feedback form at resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback. So that's it for this episode of the podcast. In next week's episode, I'm going to discuss file management and ways to organize your files to save you time in the future. So I hope you can join me for that. In the meantime, don't forget my resource of the week, Text Expander, which is on sale for the next few days at $22, which is half price. And you can get that by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/text expander. So that's it for me. If you have any comments or anything you'd like to say about this episode, please visit the show notes page at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 21 and leave a comment there. But until next week, I wish you all the best in your graphic design business. I am Mark Decote, reminding you, as always, to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.